It's like magic. I love this. Welcome, everybody, to LinkedIn Live. I'm Mark Stabina of Winning EQ. I'm an executive coach, leadership coach, and a sports broadcaster on the weekends, believe it or not. And we are not streaming through my page. We're streaming through the page of Chris Grimm of ARIA Consulting. And I am hijacking the opening because it's the only way I can get a word in when Chris is involved. But that's for good reason, because whenever she's here, she's only got valuable things to say. We are in the presence of a couple of business powerhouses. Now, I've already mentioned Chris Grimm, executive coach of over 27 years, but we can devote a whole LinkedIn Live to her another time.
So that Mark could make me feel old. Yeah, keep going.
She started when she was 7, coaching C-suite executives. And here she is today to impart her wisdom. But the reason we're really here is to honor, to celebrate, and to learn from Sean Lippman, who not only was awarded the 2023 Stevie Award for Technology Executive of the Year, which makes total sense because he is the CEO and co-founder of an award-winning e-commerce business called Feedonomics. We'll dive into that a little later. But also, one of many accolades, he is a former USA international rugby player, despite a very weird accent. Doesn't sound American at all. South African born, naturalized American, and by the way, a Rugby Hall of Famer for the USA, among many other awards. He's embarrassed right now because he's one of the most modest leaders I've ever had the pleasure of coming across. And we met about 10 years ago. So full disclosure, Sean is a friend, a mentor, and quite honestly, he is responsible for me starting my leadership coaching journey. And that's giving me some experience of bringing me into Feedonomics, where I remain today, and help him grow his amazing business. And Sean Lippman introduced me to my other mentor, who's also on the screen. I'll mention her name again, Chris Grimm, as someone that can really help me progress my journey as a leadership coach. So I've said enough, because I'm going to sit back and then sit forward from time to time and ask Sean a couple of questions, as will Chris Grimm. Welcome, Sean, and thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Mark. Where do we send the check? I forgot. The wire instructions, I think, got mixed up. You were saying that you need crypto, right? That's how you get paid these days. So.
Listen, Sean, I'll fax you an invoice,
Well, I'm probably one of the only technology executives that's still got a fax machine, so that will probably work.
So, Sean and Chris, I'm going to open up with the question, and then Chris, you're going to jump in. I love doing these with you, by the way. And as I've mentioned to our audiences before, this is just an extension of what Chris and I do on a weekly basis, it seems, have these amazing conversations. And we're like, people need to hear this. So here we are. I'm going to start with you, Sean. I mentioned that you've won this award, one of many awards you've won in your life, but no doubt this is particularly special. I guess we're here to learn from you. What does it take to win an award of Technology Executive of the Year? And I'll start up by asking quite specifically, what are the 3 to 5 to-dos, right, of being a successful entrepreneur or founder? We have many entrepreneurs, I'm sure, listening in. So what would be 3 to 5 things, must-dos, to be a successful entrepreneur?
You know, Mark, I think the first one has to be, you've got to be fearless. You just got to be willing to go for the gap and take a chance. And, there's the saying, no risk, no reward. I don't think you'll see any successful, startup entrepreneur who didn't have that, because if fear drives you, you'll never do it. And really with Feedonomics, and a lot of the way we encourage our people is to go for the gap. We take that whole concept and as you know from your sporting background, if you play with fear, you'll definitely lose, and rugby you'll get hurt. But more importantly, if you're not willing to take a chance, you're not going to know if you're going to be able to even get there. And so I think being willing to just take a crack at it and not and throw caution to the wind, obsessive focus on your customer. If you're not focused with your business on your actual end, who's paying your bills, probably not going to succeed. And that obsession's got to carry on through the business as it progresses. There's a concept that I speak to. It's something that I kind of read about in my coaching background about OODA loop. It's a situational awareness construct which forces you into a constant assessment and decision-making cycle. And I think not only when you start a business, but as you continue growing and trying to compete, if you don't build a OODA loop where you constantly you're observing, orienting, making decisions, acting, and then evaluating where you are after you made that decision, I think that's a critical part of starting a business and then iterating, because building a business is a constantly iterative process. There's no such thing as a constant state. And so you have to constantly be in an assessment mode. So you act, you see what the consequence is, and then you go back into a decision cycle. Look, I think it changes over time, but you got to have non-negotiables. You got to be pretty clear about what your non-negotiables are. I think a lot of startups and a lot of new startup founders aren't really sure who they are, what they believe in, what they want the company to be. And I think that can hamstring you, because you got to have a North Star. And so I think it's critical to be pretty clear what are the most important things. The other thing is, when you start imparting on the new people that start joining your company what's important, and if you don't act, you tell them what's important, but you don't act or follow up on it as if it's important, then they just go and say, well, clearly that's not important. So you've got to be pretty clear about that. And then look, at the end of the day, you've got to have a great product. You can have all that other stuff, but if you don't have anything that anyone doesn't, nobody wants to buy, so you've got to have a product and a service that distinguishes you from the rest. And even if it's a product that's out there, you still have to be able to differentiate yourself, whether it's with your service, with your product. It's got to be something that people ultimately want to buy. I think at the end of the day, if you don't have that, the other stuff's not going to necessarily count.
Sean, I just asked Heather, and thanks everybody. We're going to put OODA loop in the chat because you were going through that pretty fast. And I was like, wow, that's a nugget. If no one's ever heard of that, leaders, it stands for observe, orient, decide, and act. It's just a really nice organized way of thinking, but also driving your leadership behavior. So that was a golden nugget. So thanks, Mission Control, as you get that taken care of. Yeah, that was awesome. Sean, can we put some context to this? Because I think an important thing for everybody to know about you is that you've been a successful entrepreneur, founder, CEO multiple times. And for me, when I talk about you, because I talk about you, I say to people, you didn't rinse and repeat. Like you didn't, the first one was Triline Medical and sold that to Jorns. And maybe there's other details you want to put in there. But Feedonomics now is your current company, which is phenomenal, but it is a completely different business, different ecosystem, different employee base. So I just think that, first of all, is phenomenal, everybody, because the gold and the lessons that Sean has, he's proved that he could actually do his leadership, the kind of leadership Sean does, in different contexts different time periods, etc. So my question to you, Sean, is whether you want to start with Feedonomics or Tryline, it doesn't matter to me, but in those situations, like when did you know they were real companies?
When you can get through the night sleeping, maybe. I think the first time is if you can actually get through the night sleeping, without existential fear. And so I think that's really it, is, when you can start paying yourself. With Feedonomics, it took us 3 years before the founders took a paycheck. So that's a trying time. The other one is concentration. I thought about this, and it was, every new business is always going to have that very large customer that keeps the lights on. You hope you're going to get to that first customer. And when you get to a place, and so you live your life basically losing sleep about what would happen to you if you lose that big customer or those two big customers.
Right.
And it's a concentration issue. And so when your business, please God, grows to a place where even though you don't want to lose that customer, if you were to lose that customer, you would still potentially survive. I think that's the litmus test about where you've got now a sustainable business. And candidly, there's a lot of businesses that have been in that survive for a relatively long time.
Yeah.
And they still have that concentration risk.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't actually matter even how big you are, how long you've been in business. If you've got that concentration risk, you're always going to lose sleep at night. So I think those are the big ones.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other one is when you start hearing from the world that you actually exist, that outside validation, because you always think of yourself as like, no one will take us really seriously. We're just this young upstart company. You've got imposter syndrome for a long time. And then suddenly you start seeing validation from places that you weren't involved in creating. And people start talking about you as if like you're a real thing. And then you start going like, wow, I guess all these things we're saying are actually true. So you got to just stick with it.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's really great advice. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, Sean. So you've touched on it, but I really want to dive into it and emphasize it again, because as Chris would agree, our experience time and time again coaching companies, they might talk about culture being important, but it doesn't seem like they have it right. Or they say that culture is important, but really they are just mainly focused on the bottom line, profit and loss, and they're missing the mark with culture. Feedonomics, on the other hand, from my experience, and this is why I love working with you so much, is because from the outset, this is what I know about your story. You are committed to building and being a culture-led organization, and then the results will take care of themselves, which is exactly what's happening with Feedonomics. How do you build and sustain a culture like the one at Feedonomics that propels the business and the performance forward?
Yeah, look, a lot of it comes from my experience in sports. Sports is pretty visceral, and if you have a team that has a poor culture, it doesn't win. And winning and losing in sports is very, very clear. It doesn't take a long time to know that you're on a losing team. Mark,
Oh, yeah.
you're either on a team that can win, and there's some teams that win despite not having a strong culture, but they're not sustainable. And so through years of playing since I've been a kid and being on good teams and bad teams, and then entering the workforce, you start building and understanding that there's actually a very clear reason why you're either on winning teams and losing teams, whether it's sports or in business. And so over those years, it's become very clear to me that the actual foundational culture of a team, which a company is a team, is actually the primary predominant indicator for whether that team will not just experience success for some period of time, but have success on an extended period of time. And you study and you learn and you read and what other coaches do and what they don't do. So it's a learning process. But for me, it's foundational to the DNA of a company's ability to actually not only succeed, but then have and success is not necessarily when they're doing well. Success is the ability to actually sustain yourself through downtimes, because through my life, I haven't just had things have gone bad. And you say, so how were we able to get through those tough times? Because a lot of people go, it's really great to have a good culture as long as we're hitting our numbers. It's actually when you're not hitting your numbers or you're not doing well, where you need to have the foundation of a strong culture to lean on. And so it's just it's so clear to me. And so with Tryline, that evolved. I mean, when you came in to coach us, which I would say is a pretty inflectual time in my career, because until then I was trying to kind of figure it all out myself by experience and intuition. So at a certain point in time, there are experts out there who can come in and help you and guide you as long as you've got the level of self-introspection and self-awareness. But so that was a major thing for me, because it helped me understand professionally that there are actually things that I thought we could just muscle our way through, that there's specific ways of doing it in a much more systematic way. And I learned a lot from you, Chris, about that. So when I got involved with Feedonomics, a lot of that was intuitive to me. I wasn't having to figure that self out, which I was able to, which I didn't have with Tryline. And so when we started the business with just the partners and me, the first thing we did was define what the culture was going to be. We didn't wait. And then the other piece is the recognition is that, you don't put the buzzwords and the fancy, vision statements up on the wall. That's not relevant. It's actually defining what the principles are and then ensuring that you live them every day. And I always caution people. They say, oh, this culture thing or this principle thing is pretty cool. I say, be careful. It can be the most devastating thing you can do for your business, because if you go and define a set of principles that you, as the owner or the leader, and your leaders are not able and willing and are going to be held accountable to, don't do it at all.
Yeah.
Rather don't have it, because you're going to get caught out. And when you're trying to sustain this culture, which is the hardest thing in the world to do, people see through your BS. And the minute that your grassroots and your staff and your people who are fighting the fight for you every day realize that you're just full of, they stop believing. So they may say the right things. They may say, oh, yeah, we're in and we'll help and we'll work. But nobody's really there to kind of go through what will be the tough times. And when the company needs to kind of coalesce and do remarkable things. And through my experience, I've seen that DNA of that kind of culture is when you can do fantastic, remarkable things because people mobilize, not because they have to, but because they choose to. And it's no different in sports. In sports, it's the same thing. It doesn't matter how much you pay. Look at these players in the NBA and the NFL. They're getting paid so much money to be absolutely mediocre. And the ones that are succeeding aren't doing it because they're getting paid a lot. Those are the table stakes in that world. They're doing it because they absolutely believe in a cause that's bigger than their paycheck and themselves. And that's when you can do remarkable things.
I think, can we just stay here for a minute? Because Mark, I know you're instrumental, and so is Brett, who is our number one fan, by the way. Thanks, Brett.
Love you, Brett.
Always with us. But seriously, everybody, what Sean just said, we cannot move away from yet, because myself, Mark is building his business, so he will continue to have more and more experiences like I do in businesses where what Sean just said is just not what most leaders do, right? They believe that, and I've met a lot of amazing founders who do have the passion, right? Sean, in the beginning, the founders have it and they love it and they love their business and their blood, sweat, and tears. It's their baby. But learning how to translate that into a culture with other people as you grow and scale is an art. And I'm staying here because of that. And when I say, and maybe Mark, we can talk a little bit about what you and Brett do as the people who to me are the culture warriors, right? You're taking it forth, but it had to come from the leadership. And if it goes away and the leaders aren't living it every day, the culture warriors are going to have a really hard time selling it. I don't know, Mark, if you would say it in a different way than that.
Not really. I think that was pretty well said. And Sean, when I said at the start of the live that we're here to celebrate you and honor you, I really mean that. And I probably already told you this, but I've certainly told Chris, and she agrees, that when I work with other clients and they are struggling with their culture, I constantly use you and your commitment, and not just your commitment, but your execution to building culture. I use it as an example. I use you and Feedonomics as an example of this is how I've seen it work. And you might want to follow the same kind of track. And Chris, as you said, to maybe give more context, that was actually, Sean, from memory, the main reason you brought me in to Feedonomics to help you, because as the company grew rapidly, you were constantly conveying the message of culture and the principles that you based on the book Legacy. Maybe we can get Heather to put that in the chat. Legacy by James Kerr. It's a book about the 15 principles that the New Zealand All Blacks rugby team followed that makes them the most successful sporting team in history. And you've already mentioned a couple of those principles and how you've translated them into building your culture. So when you were struggling with time and your responsibilities increased, and you said, Mark, would you be willing to come in and sort of help me deliver the message I've been delivering? Because there's more and more Feedos. And then 5 years later, with Brett, who you mentioned, Chris, as the director of people empowerment, I think that was a fantastic move to create that team. Once again, that shows your commitment to culture. So
discipline, right? It's a commitment to, we're not just going to talk about it.
Yeah.
We're going to every day shoot the medicine, or I don't know what you all call what you do, but it's not optional, right? Like this is who we are.
Yes, for sure.
Well, sorry, Sean, before you dive in, when you say that, this is what's remarkable, Chris. So we do legacy. Thanks, Brett. When we do legacy sessions, which is 5 times a year, by the way, again, what's different to other companies? They'll have it posted on the wall if they are in a physical office. Like you mentioned, Sean, here are the principles. We came up with it at the start. 10 years later, they're still the same principles, and the employees aren't connected to them, don't even know what they mean, right? But we've got them as a check the list. Vision, yes. Principles, yes. Mission, that's just what you do. But are your people truly connected to them? And Sean, as you said, the execution, Chris, is that, no, we need to continue communicating. And we're always adding new Feedos, new employees. So they need to know, and they need to know how important it is. So when we communicate that and we actually get people doing workshops and creating those experiences and participating themselves, that is a way to perpetuate those values and keep them alive and keep people practicing them. Chris, to your point, it's not optional. These sessions are optional. Mm-hmm. It's another thing that which puts the pressure on us to say, or to make them so compelling and important and deliver the message in a way that Feedos or the employees of Feedonomics buy in. And we get over 90 to 95% participation for something that's not compulsory. And I just think that's remarkable. I've never seen it in any other company.
That's pretty unique. But I got to say, look, it's not because of me, and that's the whole concept of culture. If it's because of a person, you're screwed, because you're going to scale out.
Yeah.
It's the whole concept of sustainable culture is the people have to own the culture, not the boss. Not the coach. The players have to own their culture, and the players have got to be the ancestors to the people that come after them. Because what do? In the old days, I interviewed everybody and I met with every single person, and I still will interview a lot of people, but I'll meet with everybody, but in a more group setting. So I don't have that I don't get that as much time with the new people. And also, we're all in a small office and we're working together and fighting together. So they know, they can see. So the only way you perpetuate your culture is your people in the company have got to own the culture. And so the reason why this is happening is not because of me, it's because our leaders, our vice presidents, our directors, our managers, our team leaders, everybody's a leader in the company. It doesn't matter what their title is, because everybody has the ability to show by their actions what it's like to be a great ancestor, which is really what we're trying to create, which is you now own the obligation to show the people that come after you and that are there even before you what it's like to live these principles in this company, how to take care of each other, how to take care of the client, how to always be empathetic, how to create a learning environment, how do you teach people. There's just so much organized training you can give people. The training comes from teammates taking each other under their wing and saying, let me help you. How can I be there for you? Eliminating silos, not allowing politics. And these are all the barriers to having successful companies, teams, communities. So the primary objective is eliminate the barriers to allowing people to be able to function really, really well together. And then you say, okay, so what's the benefit? Of course, it's a better place to work, right? But more importantly, our client experience is always going to be enhanced because they're working with people, whether it's the people who build our technology or who help them on service calls or help them with their billing. Those people care, not because we told them they have to care, but just because they care.
Mm-hmm.
And you look at any fantastic team, whether it's sports or business, the ones that do that really well are the ones that typically sustain themselves and do better than the ones that don't.
Mm-hmm. But I just want to, before we move on, this is so important because I feel like, one, Sean, you take it for granted less now than you did before. But I remember many years ago when I told you that what you were doing was unique, you didn't know because you were in your company and you were doing it, right? And what Mark is saying is right. We walk into other organizations and what happens, and I'm speaking not just to us, but everybody here who's on or whether you watch it later, this is important. Most founders and CEOs, leaders, big companies, small companies, tend to have values and foundational pillars of their culture, whatever you want to call them, that are highly aspirational. And oftentimes they don't always connect easily for employees to real life. And I think you taking Legacy, that book is in the chat. Heather Hill is the person that has the link there, everybody. Even if you don't like rugby, although I don't know how you can't not want to read about the All Blacks, but anyway, even if this doesn't resonate for anybody, what I want you to look at is what I'm saying here. The values, the principles that are in that book that you've adopted and you've deployed in Feedonomics, they aren't really, I mean, they sound nice, but they're not lofty and aspirational. They are very, very real and they dictate behavior, right? Like you actually have to behave in certain ways and demonstrate it, which I think is brilliant. And you don't even realize that until you go into organizations and you see these big old fluffy things. And later they head scratch and say, well, the people aren't living it. And I'm like, well, the reason the people aren't living it is because you haven't connected the dots between what that actually means in real life, in a real situation.
Well, it's simpler than that, Chris. The reason that people aren't living it is because the owners, the bosses aren't living it. It's just as simple as that. It's like telling your children to behave in a certain way and then you're not doing it. I'm not saying that our employees or our teammates are children, but it's all based on, they look at you, they say, well, let's see. You're saying, nobody gives a crap about what you say. They give a crap about what you do. Mm-hmm. And so the people, and that's why it's a very scary thing when I see companies, they say we want to take on these principles, say, well, are you going to hold yourself? Are you going to hold your partners? Are you going to hold your leadership team accountable to these? And are you going to call each other out when you're acting like in the book, it's a D-head, right? Or acting or putting your ego before that of the broader team. And so the one thing I think we've done relatively well is that we have called each other out and we hold each other accountable to it. And if you do that, then people will see that you're actually that you're truthful about wanting to do it. It's the hardest thing in the world to build, and it's the easiest thing in the world to lose. It really is. And if you know, and that's why we have Mark Stabina and Brett and teams that are, if you want to call it, the guardians of the culture, because if you at a certain scale, you can't just muscle your way through it. You have to be more systematic about it. You have to be really focused on, just like in coaching, right? You got to have metrics. You got to know if you're meeting the mark. And then you got to be really engaged with your teammates to know if they're in or they're out. And we try and do that very, very deliberately.
Yeah. Mark, I'll pass the ball to you if you want to ask the next question.
Yeah, I could stay on this culture thing all day, definitely.
Important.
But talking about leadership, Sean, and as you said, your people are only as willing to go as, or you should only be willing to ask of your people what you're willing to do yourself. Back to you and leadership. Is there a leadership regret that you may have? Something you wish you'd handled better in your career as a leader and entrepreneur?
I can't wait to hear this.
Probably a million. I think. Look, at the end of the day, if you haven't made more mistakes than you've made good decisions, you probably haven't learned enough. Right? You think about it, where's most of your learning come from? Not from the stuff that you got lucky on or you did well. It should all come from a learning. So a million different things. One that comes to mind is, is it so easy to have your you got your principles and you stick with them, but you get tempted sometimes to step outside of the principles, right? And one of ours is like a no egos rule, right? If we sense that now high performers have got big egos, they should, but they need to be able to manage them within the context of a broader team. They've got to be able to subvert their ego to the benefit of the broader team. And so we once had this opportunity to get like the Rainmaker salesperson, right? And we were 3-4 years into the business. You're always looking for that magical pill that's going to, take you to another level. And so we found a salesperson who, very impressive on paper and all of this. And we knew, and through the interview process, through the period of time that it took for him to join us, through the period of time that he was with us, there was a million signs that this was going to be a detractor. It was going to really hurt the business. And we still followed through with it despite our better judgment. We knew that it was going against our gut and we actually were willing to make the compromise. We said, we've got this no egos rule, but this person is going to take us to a whole different level. And you see it in sports all the time, right? We're going to get, James Harden, or we're going to get Russell Westbrook or whoever that player is. But you just got to look back and say, wait a second, it's so clear that the fit's not there. You're compromising your integrity. So we did it. And it was about a year of that, a year plus because of the time leading in. But I think that if I look back, I think it did a lot of harm to our business because I think we and our leadership lost credibility because all of our people were looking at this person going like, this is not what we say we are. This is not who we say we are. And so you're now bringing this person in. And so I think it's super risky when you do it. Sometimes, it makes sense. It seems like, but it's one of those things, you learn from it. You hopefully, the damage is, there's always damage, right? When you don't live your principles, there's always damage. But I would say that from my perspective was one where I totally went against my better judgment. The signs were all clear. and we still went through it, hoping, it's like, what's it? Hoping, you always hope for the best, right? Well, even though I know it's sometimes in relationships, it's like that. You go like, oh, there's all these signs, but you know what? It's probably going to get better once we start dating, And it's like, oh, I hate to tell you, but it was as good as it was going to be. The first date, that was going to be the best one,
Wow, I didn't know we were going to get into dating advice.
Yeah.
It's like I tell our folks, when we're interviewing people and they go like, I think, the person's really good on paper and this and that. They got a great degree. So let me just tell you something. How you feel right now is probably the best you're going to feel. Generally, it doesn't. Obviously, if it starts off fantastic, it gets better. But if it doesn't start off that great, it doesn't typically get better.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a big part of how you sustain a great culture. You got to be, and that's very hard when you're starting a company because you don't have enough money to hire everyone you want to hire. And so you have to find the diamonds in the rough. You have to be very intuitive about bringing the right people in who are going to form the foundation of your DNA. Because if you don't bring the right people in, and I've got to say, from a Feedonomics perspective, when I look at, we've got people that came in, at entry level and are vice presidents of the company right now because they had the right stuff. They were the diamonds in the rough. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people focus on what school did you go to and what was the company you worked for and what was your title there. And it's really just a data point for us, but it's not what drives our decision to bring people in. If you can get to a place where it's very, very difficult for a person to get a job with you, you're probably doing things right. Because especially companies that start growing very quickly start hiring, they start losing some of their discipline around hiring. And you'll lose your culture in a heartbeat if you bring the wrong people in.
It's so easy to do though when you're scaling, you're doubling in size. I have a client right now that they're doubling like every year, and if you take your eye off that ball.
Well, if I can add to that, again, that speaks to the importance of principles and values, having them solidified, like you said, Sean, you believe in them and you are willing to live by them as a leader. That can also become the framework from which you hire. If a lot of it's character-based, then just like the All Blacks say in Legacy, you've got these 15 principles, we live by them daily, and if somebody's emerging as a high performer, right, a whiz kid, a talented rugby player, straight away, because we've been following these values, we can see whether they fit that. We can observe their behavior and almost make a decision like they don't have what it takes. They do.
I mean, if you ask your people, especially when you're growing quickly and people are being stretched, which Lord knows we've stretched our people beyond, in some cases, it's beyond human what our people have done. But if you ask them, would you prefer to keep on working as hard as you're doing, or let us bring in help for you that are the wrong people? They'll be willing to work as hard as it takes to make sure that you provide the time to bring in the right people, because everybody wants the right teammate. They all want the right people around them to help grow and perpetuate the culture. And when you create an environment where it's very, very important, I would say, a lot of our people stay with us not because we're paying them the most, especially in our earlier years, or it's because they're being afforded the opportunity to work in an environment where they feel empowered. And part of that empowerment is knowing that we take it very seriously who we bring in to work next to them. And that's an important thing, because it provides them with respect. You're saying we respect, what you do, to the point of making sure we're going to do everything we can to put the right talent around you.
And that's so not normal. So amazing. Okay, I can I ask a question, or do you want to keep going with that, Mark?
No, Chris, please.
I'm going to ask a surprise question, Sean.
Okay,
are you ready?
Surprises.
No warnings. So I'm just interested, and it just came up for me, like, What do you tell like entrepreneurs, founders, leaders? I know you spoke at UCLA to a MBA class recently about risk taking, like when to take risk and when to maybe not take risk. Because I've seen you be super conservative. I've seen you take risk. You know what I mean? Like what is your philosophy on that, and how do you teach that to your leaders?
Whew, that's a toughie. Look, it's kind of like sometimes it's like telling somebody you should jump off a cliff and don't worry, it's all going to be good when you land, right? You're going to get a nice whiff of. It's a high flying act. I think you've got to have in your DNA an absolute desire to. You've got to know why you're doing it, right? What is driving you to want to? Because it's not an easy thing starting a company. You know what the percentages of startups that actually succeed. I think it's exceptionally small. So it's a big obligation when you go to people and say, "Oh, you should all be entrepreneurs. You should all go and be your own boss." And it's like it's not that simple. I think at the core of people that typically do well as founders and entrepreneurs are people who there's a saying, Robert's got a saying, it's about, you become your own boss so you can work 10 times harder and make significantly less money. Something like that, which really it is. You've got to be willing to sign your house up. You've got to be willing to put everything at risk. You've got to be willing to forego a lot of your own career advancement. You've got to learn a lot of stuff that you don't know about because nobody teaches you about all the bad stuff that's going to happen to you. Mm-hmm. And so I think you've got to just have an insane desire to not want to work on a job or work for anyone. I think really that's what it is. And people who are like, well, I kind of really like my job. I like the security of my job. And if that's kind of the balancing act between deciding to jump off that cliff, I think it's going to be very risky because it's now the other part of it, you still have to use proper business logic, proper business principles. So you still got to have the foundation of common sense. So it's not just about, you should go out and become an entrepreneur. And the good thing is when you sell T-shirts online, that's a great business. You say, well, T-shirts online is a tough business. Yeah. So you've got to still evaluate the viability of your idea. You've still got to go through the tremendous pain of figuring out, does it work? Is there a market fit? Can you execute on it? Do you have the capital, whether it's your own or someone else's? But at the end of the day, you will typically find more reasons not to do it than to do it, for sure. And so at a certain point in time, you got to just have an insane amount of belief. And then hopefully if you've got the insane amount of belief coupled with hopefully the right background, we didn't build Feedonomics just because we had a lot of belief. We've got, with my partners, Gary and Robert and Brian and all the other people.
Are you getting the facts? That's what I wanted.
I thought I'd turn it off. At some point in time, you still got to have the capability to build something remarkable because belief is the table stakes. And so it's got to be, I think, a good balance between just absolute desire and belief and resilience, the ability to deal with, and then coupled with, you got to have skill. You got, the Groizens, probably the greatest, minds, that I've met. Gary, my best friend, from trust and ability, and he's done this before. And so it's a mixture of a lot of things. So I would say lots. There's a lot of things in that checklist, and that is why so many startups fail.
Yeah.
Because they'll have some of that stuff, but not necessarily all of that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. God, I could say so many things, but Mark, I'll let you.
Yeah. Well, just while we're on this advice for budding entrepreneurs and leaders, Sean, you're a student of leadership and business and entrepreneurship, and you're You're an avid reader of leadership books and other resources. You've passed many along to me over the years. What would be a few that have really left an impact on you that people can dive into themselves to learn more about effective leadership and entrepreneurship? Any books, current books? Obviously, we've talked about legacy. What else?
Yeah, look, I think legacy resonated with me at a very high level. We've built a whole company on those principles, and we've made them our own. At the end of the day, all of the books, if you read a lot of them, they all have the same foundational message, and that's really what really explains that it's not magical stuff. I mean, it's not magical stuff. It's a perpetual or constant success or perpetuating success comes, whether it's in sports or in business, from all the same basic concepts. They're simple concepts, super, super difficult to implement and live. But like legacy just resonated. It's 15 principles. It's a team that's won 80-90% of their games over 100 years. There's something there, right? That's worth taking a look at. The one that resonated the most with me outside of that is The $1 Trillion Coach. It's a book about Bill Campbell, who actually had, I don't want to say he's got the same background as me, because he's a little bit different. I'm the $1 coach, and he's the $1 trillion coach. But he's a fantastic, fascinating guy. He was in sports. He was the coach at Columbia, the football coach at Columbia for 30 years or 20 years, till he was in his, I think, mid to late 40s. And they lost. Columbia, I don't know if you remember, they had the longest losing streak in NCAA football forever. And he was one of the most fantastic coaches. So because he got the culture piece. They lost. They were Columbia, but and then he went on to Silicon Valley, and he was one of the key founders of Adobe. He was the key coach for the Schultz and the guys at Google. And a lot of the way he led, I think, probably came from a similar foundation to me, which is sports-based. And then the way he chose to lead within those companies is something that resonated with me. I think it's a fantastic book. The other one, Chris put me onto a lot of really great books in our day. All the ones what's it, James Lencioni? Is it James Lencioni?
That's it.
5 Dysfunctions of the Team.
Yeah, so those ones were fantastic, but he then wrote one which kind of captured them all in The Advantage, and there were some really great takeaways I got in The Advantage, which he wrote. Yeah. And then the one that I only read recently, which I'm driving everybody crazy at work and anywhere I go, my kids and everybody, is the one that I read relatively recently, which I wish I would have read in my 20s. I wish I would have read it in my 20s, which is The Untethered Soul, which when I told Chris I read it, she was like,
I still look, no words.
Shocked.
Everybody, wow.
I'm a hardhead, and a lot of what I lead with my red side of my brain and all of that, and I read the first 70 pages. I said, oh shucks, I wish I would have read this a long time ago, but maybe I wasn't mature enough at that time anyway. And the other one I love is Perform Under Pressure by Kerry Evans. So a lot of them, sometimes rugby based. He was the psychological brain behind the All Blacks. He was the guy, their sports psychologist. And so he wrote a fantastic book about how do you deal with performing under pressure. The book is called Perform Under Pressure by Kerry Evans. I think it's Ceri Evans. And he first talks about, he leads off with neuroscience. How does the brain work? Which is really interesting, because once you understand kind of the different sides of the brain and how they drive different behavior, then when he speaks about how he leans into it and how you use that kind of awareness to kind of be in the moment about why you're behaving and reacting in a certain way, which then allows you to build your OODA loop around, oh, okay, I guess I'm getting really heated right now. Or I'm getting really fearful that I'm going to lose the game, or I'm going to lose the client. And it helps you kind of coach yourself through the situation, which candidly as a player, I wish I would have had when I was playing, because I played with just pure emotion and raw instinct, but with not that much cerebral. I don't think I was very cerebral while I played. And you got to have a really healthy, I think the great players and performers have got a really great, healthy mix of being able to articulate themselves physically, but at the same time have a really good understanding of where they are on their emotional bandwidth and control it. And I think that's what makes the really great players. What I want to try to do it, and hopefully we're trying, is to do it with business. And so I try and help coach, which, in a large extent, I kind of feel like my career has migrated away from being a boss to being a coach. It's what I enjoy. But because if people don't need bosses, they need people who can help them become better at what they do.
Mhm.
People don't necessarily even need coach, and that's really where if you can build an organization where then you can teach your leaders not to be, everyone's a leader, but to be coaches and kind of re-emulate that with their people, is when you create scalability to performance. And that's really interesting to me, is how can you scale performance? Easier to do in a 5-person team, easier to do in a 20-person team, very difficult to do in a 500-person team. But if you can unlock that magic with 500 people or 100,000 people, wow, I mean, the things that you can achieve can be pretty remarkable.
Well, then people are going to be buying your books. And I just want to say thank you to Heather. She got all those. They're in the
Yeah, Heather, amazing. Thank you.
Go. And we've got some superheroes in the chat. I just want to say Khalil and Guy, wow, and Karuna, Troy, hi.
Good to see you all. Thank you.
Usually it's just us and Brett. Like, John, you are the magnet here. So, yeah, look, don't take that for granted, John. This is amazing. That was an incredible list, by the way, everybody. And Untethered Soul, I still can't. I'm amazed.
I'd love to.
I'm pushing my kids to try read it, and they give me the normal, yes, here he goes again, but I think but I do think you got to be in the right place. You got to be at the right place in your life to be able to kind of have it read. You got to have all of the silliness of your life to be able to reflect on it and say, but you wouldn't have been silly if you hadn't been silly. You wouldn't need the book. So
I need to highlight something now, if that's okay, and touch on. We've talked about culture and building culture. You've provided us some wonderful strategies, Sean, and frameworks from which you operate. I need to talk about you as a leader. And again, Chris will agree with me how rare it is that with all your knowledge and discipline and commitment to leadership and business strategy, you care so much about your people. What I see a feature of your leadership is that you lead with empathy, a word that's becoming more of a buzzword in the corporate world at the moment, rightly so. And you exemplify empathy. How important is it? And if you can give us some insight into how much you lean into pairing your business strategy with empathy, compassion, just basically caring for your people on a human level.
Well, if you can't care for your people, how are they going to care for your customer?
Mm-hmm.
It's so even if you're faking your empathy, which I don't think is possible, because you either got it or you don't.
Well, there's people who try. But yeah.
At the end of the day, if you are dedicated to acquiring customers, which is what businesses are there to do,
right,
and keep their customers, which businesses should be there to do, how do you do it and tell your customers, we care about you and we're here for you, and if things go wrong, we're there to help you, and and then you tell your employees or your team members something completely different.
Mm-hmm.
How is it possible for you to create an integrity? The companies that do well are the ones that sustain their integrity in the marketplace, that they sustain their reputation in their marketplace. The reason why Feedonomics has got very little negative or no negative stuff out there either through our people. Not everybody loved us, right? And not every customer loved us. But Lord knows we did everything we could to try to do good by them, as much as we could possibly do. Because the minute you start creating an environment where there's this negativity in the world, maybe it's karma, and I'm not, I didn't read the book that well. But you establish your karma in the world, right?
Yeah.
And it will follow you wherever you go. Your reputation is all you have. And so even if it's from a self-serving perspective, how do you expect your salespeople to sell when the first thing that someone goes and looks at on the internet and finds Feedonomics, crappy company, liars, cheaters, stealers, and then you tell your salesperson, you just tell them you're really not. The only way you can do it is by making sure it's not there.
Mm-hmm.
And so it doesn't start with your customer. It starts with the people that are representing you to your customers, not the other way around. And so you don't have a choice, candidly. You don't have a choice to care about your people and to treat them with you have an obligation. There's a dual obligation every time you decide that you bring in a person into your team, which is you've got to do everything to empower them and give them the tools to be successful. And then they need to ensure that they take all of that and pay it forward. And they pay it forward to your customer. At the end of the day, companies exist to serve their customers. The people who pay your paycheck are not Wall Street, aren't the bank. It's the people who you service every day. The people who made a decision that I pick you versus that other company, which there always is. I pick you. And then you have an obligation to make sure that any promise you made that customer, you follow through and you do. And that's what we do. And there's been times when there was a misunderstanding or some kind of misalignment of expectations.
Yeah.
And the first thing you do is you say, no, if we promise them something, we're going to deliver. So you lose on that one, but you win on the average. And that's the other part that people don't realize is you don't win ever because you scored a basket or you scored a try or you got a client. You win because you always are succeeding on the average. That's what creates perpetual success. And so that's got to be something that's just non-negotiable. From our perspective, that's got to be something that's non-negotiable. You got to play the long game. And if I tell you the amount of clients that we weren't able to get 3, 4, 5 years ago, who left us 3, 4, 5 years ago, that are coming back. They go, look, you gave it a try. And we realized, now's the right time. Because you just never, ever burn a bridge.
Mm-hmm. And that is why this is the boss you actually want to work for. I honestly just think we just captured your talent acquisitions team video now for them to, not the Feedonomics even needs help attracting people, by the way. But if you had a moment, we just solved that, Sean. That was amazing. And we didn't script that, everybody. This is actually the man. The myth, the legend. Things. Yeah, it's really, really good.
I say we wrap it up with that, Chris. What a way to bring it round and cap it. People pay a lot of money to show up to conferences to hear this kind of advice from Sean Lippman, and you're all getting it for free.
Exactly.
If I can package it and make people pay for this later. Anyway, I'll figure that out. But Sean, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Even knowing you for over a decade, I still learn from you each and every interaction we have. Same with you, Chris. So it's been an honor and a privilege to share this virtual stage with both of you. And thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it. About 10% of what you said is correct. But
Heather, can you cut that? Okay, we'll cut that.
You know how before we started, you said, I'm the big head on the screen. Now, after that, I'm really the big head on the screen.
Good. That was our intention. You deserve that. You deserve all the celebration and praise. And I'm glad we embarrassed you with that.
Yeah.
Chris, would you like to sign us off? This is Aria Consulting's LinkedIn Live, so you get to bring us home.
Well, I just want to say thank you to both of you, and could not be more fun. I feel like at this point in my career, I just get to hang out with really cool people, including people in the chat. Like, wow, like we have some amazing people. And thank you, by the way, always to Heather, our mission control. I would die without Heather. And maybe today everybody knows why, because she's always Johnny on the spot, making sure that those books were all links in the chat. And if you don't follow Sean Lippman, we're going to make him do more of this kind of stuff. So if you don't follow his profile in Feedonomics, come on now.
Yeah.
And of course, Mark, by now people are following you just for the accent, besides all the fact that other things that you do and say are good. So.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, give us all a follow, because we're going to do more of these, not just because we need the following, but we like to put this out in the world. And you've all been a great audience, and we'd love to see you show up on future lives. So please give us a follow. We'll follow you back. Let's build this community. This is why we love LinkedIn so much. And let's keep the ball rolling.
All right.
Thank
There we
you.
go. Everybody has to go do work now. Bye.
Oh, yep. Okay.
Everybody.
Thanks, everyone.